Alejandro Aravena is not only one of the best architects of his generation, he is also a master at inspiring people to follow his vision for what architecture should be about. And sharing his vision for an architecture that takes its responsibilities on social issues, an architecture that voluntarily makes the world a better place, was the main reason he won the most prestigious recognition to architects, the Pritzker Prize. But what's interesting with Aravena is that he's not only respected by specialists, he's also honored by the general public. Each of his interviews or presentation raises a lot of positive comments, and even more than that, you can see that people connect strongly to what he says, the same way they will follow a political leader. So I wanted to understand what makes Aravena's speeches so appealing and how we can use the same techniques in our own life and own projects. And the obvious answer would be that he has indeed a good vision for what architecture should be. An architecture shaped for society, an architecture that aims to fix social problems. And this is partly true. Who could go against a guy that wants to make the world a better place? But that's not it. It's not because you have a good art for you to make people adopt your vision and feel empowered to do things. We all know people with good art, but it doesn't always mean that they can transport you into their stories and make you want to follow them towards their goals. So it's why you need more than that, and Aravena has this little extra thing that all good leaders have in common. And it is that they know how to tell stories. And let me repeat that, they know how to tell stories. And why I'm focusing on the how is because telling stories that lights up emotion isn't an art. You cannot just spit out words and it will become interesting and empowering. Telling stories can actually be a science, which means that there is a secret recipe for good stories that makes them interesting for the audience, easy to follow and rememberable. And it all comes down to using the right story structure. And the story structure I'm going to show you today is actually a universal structure that you will be able to use on a daily basis. It's the same structure that makes Hollywood movies successful, the same structure that makes Disney stories appealing to pretty much anyone, and the same structure great architects use to transform a simple blueprint into a remarkable story. So let's get into it. Welcome to Architect on Steroids, the channel that shows you how to win architectural projects using famous architects' techniques. And today we are going to see how Alejandro Aravena tells stories. And how he tells stories using the most famous story structures of all time. A story structure that you can learn and that will allow you to transport people into your journey with ups and downs and a lot of emotions. So the concept scriptwriters and some architects use is simply called the 3-act structure. And so basically it's composed of 3 parts, as the title says, the beginning, the middle and the end. But here we are going to call these parts Act 1, Act 2 and Act 3. So it seems pretty easy looking at it this way, but there's some complexity to it that we are going to see now. And it starts with Act 1. And Act 1 is, so it's the beginning, but more than the beginning, it's a setup. It is where you are going to introduce your main character and the environment in which the story takes place. So it is, for example, when you see Simba from The Lion King introduced to his kingdom, or it is when you see Harry Potter at the beginning of every movie with his friends, either in London or Hogwarts. So this is the part where you set up the stage, the environment, the main characters. So this is pretty flat. We're here and not much happens, but then something happens here, and this is where we go from Act 1 to Act 2. So this is at this part that Simba sees his dad falling off a cliff and then dying. It is when Harry Potter sees his name in the Goblet of Fire and knows he will have to compete. So this is when James Bond receives a call that tells him that he needs to save the world. So this is the first turning point, going from Act 1 to Act 2. So Act 1, where the world is pretty normal for the main character, to Act 2, where the action takes place. And it is this transition between Act 1 and Act 2 that the hero understands his goal or the problem he will have to face and overcome. And there is no going back. Simba will have to live without his dad, Harry Potter will have to complete the goblet of fire, and James Bond will need to save the world. So we are now in Act 2, and Act 2 is very important because it is where the audience is going to follow the hero in his journey. It is where we'll see the growing challenges the main character will need to overcome in pursuit of his goal. It is when Harry Potter needs to go through growing challenges in order to reach the Goblet of Fire. It is when the Wolf of Wall Street has more and more unethical and illegal behaviors in pursuit of his goal to become rich, or it is the rising problems James Bond needs to overcome in order to save the world. And despite all his or her effort, the main character will end up to a point where his goal seems unreachable. It is where everything seems to be lost. It is a crisis moment. So in Act 2, we are going to see that the hero needs to go through growing challenges up to this crisis moment. And to overcome this crisis, the hero needs to grow as a person and needs to learn the message the story wants to communicate. For example, it is when Simba understands that life will someday require you to be brave in order to fight for what you think is important for your community, for your friends and your family. It is with this message that the hero overcomes his limit. It is the moment we've been all waiting for. So this is a universal recipe for great stories, and it is used in centuries and still very powerful today. And it is why most of writers and script writers still use these structures for their own stories. But this YouTube channel wasn't created to talk about books and movies. So you might wonder, how can this be useful for your own career and your own architectural projects? Because it seems much harder. You cannot add explosions and dragons like Hollywood does. But it's why I found Alejandro Aravena's skills fascinating, because he managed to use the story structure we just saw perfectly to transform what should be just a building into a story that lights up emotions. So let's see how he does it. And as you know now, it all starts with Act 1, the setup. The setup where you are going to introduce the environment, the hero, and what he believes in. And in our case, the hero is Alejandro Aravena himself, and what he believes in is that architecture and your life in general should be used for common good.
I mean, we're in this life, we're given a certain amount of heartbeats. We try to spend those heartbeats in things that we think matter, are relevant, that are challenging. So just to do something for the sake of doing it, doesn't interest.
So this is the hero and what he believes in a nutshell. So the hero needs to want something and be proactively trying to get it. Aravena is proactively using architecture for common goods. It's what he believes in. And the second important part of Act 1 is the environment in which the story takes place. And of course, Aravena doesn't forget about this part, so let's see how he introduces his story.
The initial, not question, I would say brief, was that the bank wanted to do the headquarters in the slum. That's already a very bold move. It's an unusual decision from the president of the bank saying that, okay, we're a bank, but we're a development bank. So unless with our own building do the equivalent of what we do with the loans we give to governments to improve people's quality of life, then what kind of bank are we?
So this is a perfect introduction, because now you understand the setup, the architect, the poor neighborhood, the development bank, so you understand the big picture. But in order to move on, we need a problem, we need a challenge that the hero will need to face. And this is this confrontation that's going to make the hero go from Act 1 in his usual world to Act 2 in an unknown world. So let's see the challenge Aravena will need to face.
Governments to improve people's quality of life, then what kind of bank are we? So there was a legitimate question, can we do the headquarters in the slum?
So here's the problem, is it possible to build a bank in a poor neighborhood? And so the question is, how is Aravena going to accomplish this goal? And the easy answer would be to focus on designing a building without caring much about the environment. It seems logical because Aravena is an architect, not a urban planner, so it would be normal that he doesn't manage the infrastructure part of this project. So this is exactly what the scriptwriters call the lie the character believes. And the idea here is that the best stories aren't the one where the hero fights a criminal. It is a story where the hero is transformed by the journey and the people he or she met. This transformation can be explained as the lie the character believes. It is a strong idea that the hero has about himself or the world, and that he will need to overcome at the crisis moment. And the lie Aravena believes we'll see is that architecture is constrained into designing a building within a given piece of land. So with all of this understanding of the story, we arrive at the end of Act 1 and the hero, Aravena, accepts the mission. So the setup ends and the story begins for real. And since Aravena accepted the mission, there's only two options for him. Either he reaches his goal or he doesn't. There is no going back anymore. So the main character will start this journey, and at the beginning everything is going to look quite easy. But quickly he or she will face obstacles, and the list of problems will rise up to a point where the hero's goals will seem unreachable. Look.
So we entered the proposal. That's already a very fascinating challenge. So it qualifies as a project where you would like to spend your heartbeats. The thing is that after a while, after understanding the disconnection of this neighborhood, even though you can look 200 meters away from the richest neighborhood in Buenos Aires, there's no access. So we would have required from the city so many extra things. You know, what about the pedestrian access? If the city, okay, we do that, but we need a pedestrian access. Car access, I mean, the bank operates as meetings with representatives, with ministers. What about security? And the conditions were so many that our recommendation to the bank was, look, despite your good intentions, in here, this is going to be a white elephant.
In a movie, Act 2, where the rising action really happens, will be the main part of the story. But here, for the interview purposes, Aravena compressed this part into few sentences, yet we still understand the growing challenges he had to face up to the crisis moment where he believes there is no way you can put a bank in such neighborhood. It is during this part that the hero is in a situation of huge danger, where he doesn't find a way to his problem. Everything he believed in seems to fall apart, and he has no other choice to give up. And it's exactly what happens to Aravena.
And it would be not only a bad thing for you, but also for the neighborhood that receives this thing that produces no benefits. Also for other institutions that maybe with the good intention of improving the general quality of life and common good, by looking at the bank and said, you know, this is what happens when you try to do unconventional stuff. So we better made sure that a success is not guaranteed, at least likely. So our recommendation to the bank was not accept the site that we're being given and do it somewhere else. But after leaving that, it was on one night, one of the partners, Gonzalo, we were on the taxi and we had to make the presentation the next day. And in principle, the recommendation was to quit, which meant for us to lose the project as well.
So now you understand what I mean by the crisis moment, by everything seems to be lost. It is when Simba sees his kingdom destroyed, it is when Harry Potter seems helpless facing Voldemort, or it is when Ratatouille sees his dream restaurant closing. And in our case, it's when Aravena understands that architecture alone cannot solve all the problems he thought it could. But it is at this specific moment that the hero will be able to reach his goal only if he overcomes the lie the character believes, remember? So here, Aravena needs to think broader than just architecture.
And we had to make the presentation the next day, and in principle the recommendation was to quit, which meant for us to lose the project as well. And Gonzalo said, but what if, instead of asking for a pedestrian bridge, that the bank itself is the pedestrian bridge? It not only solved all the problems of the bank having one leg in each neighborhood, in terms of security, instead of access, in terms of infrastructure needed for working as an institution. It didn't require from the city all those things that need to be pre-done in order to even start the construction. It could be taken care with the budget of the bank itself.
So this perfectly illustrates what Act Act 3 should be about. It is a moment we've all been waiting for. It is all the tension accumulated in Act 2 up to the crisis moment that's released in Act 3. And what's important to remember about Act 3 is that this moment can only be beautiful because the hero had to overcome a lot of challenges. And the harder the problems, the more exciting the victorious moment will be. Just imagine, Aravena's stories wouldn't have had the same impact on you, on the jury, on anyone, if he would have just said, I had a project for a bank, I designed the bank where it was supposed to be, and now the bank is built. I guess you didn't feel any emotion with this story. Well, it's normal, because you need ups and downs. You need downs to appreciate the ups. You know, it's like people who were born rich versus people who became rich. If you're not born rich, you had to go through much more troubles and painful moments in order to reach your goal and be successful. And it is because of these hard moments, because it wasn't easy, that you have a bigger sense of accomplishment. It is the same thing here. You need to tell the bad times in order to enjoy the good ones. And this is where your story can end. But the best stories aren't the one where only the hero goes throughout his journey, but it is when the hero comes back to his usual world and teaches us the lesson he learned so we can all grow together. And it is in this epiphany that is hidden the power of a good story. And what's amazing with Alejandro Aravena is that he didn't forget about this part. It's exactly how he's going to end his story, teaching us what he learned and what we can learn also about architecture.
So I guess that project somehow represents that the type of challenges that we have nowadays in cities are much more complex and much more sophisticated. I mean, we generated the built environment where there were huge deficits, and the operations was by sectors. Somebody was doing housing, somebody infrastructure, somebody in public space. Nowadays, all the problems that we have cut across all these sectors and these compartments. And I guess that the challenge nowadays, or the scarcest resource, is not money, but coordination. And architecture has in its very innermost core a very powerful tool, which is the project. It's synthetic. It can, by nature, coordinate things that otherwise may be dispersed.
And this is the lesson the story was aimed to teach us since the beginning. So the listener, the viewer, can come back to his own life, enriched with this new way to see the world. And it's what we feel when we see a movie, finish a book that moves us. It is what it means. It moves you from the world you knew to a world with a different perspective. And this only happens with stories, books and movies, for example, because concepts alone aren't enough. It's not going to change people's vision. You need a character that the audience can embody, that experience the same journey throughout the story, so you can go together, and therefore both the hero and the audience learn the lesson the story was made for. So of course you won't always be able to create a story around your projects using the 3-act structure, because you won't always have ups and downs and a lesson at the end that's going to change people's point of view on life or architecture. But when you can transform your project into a story, you should absolutely do it and talk about it. It is the best way to make your idea stick, and the proof is that I am sure you will remember Aravena's stories for a while now. But the thing is that if you want to create a story and you want your story to be great, you will need to prepare it in advance. What I mean is that all great speeches, all great stories have been thought and written in advance. Don't think that Aravena randomly came up with the perfect answer. He knew since the beginning what he wanted to say and he said it. Because listen carefully to the questions the interviewer asked Aravena before he told the whole story of the project.
Because what happens when you kind of take all the stakeholders into account, both from kind of the bank, but also the people doing the food, the neighbors, the security persons? What is happening in this process?
So this was the initial question, basically what it is like to deal with different types of stakeholders. You notice that the interviewer didn't ask Aravena to tell the whole story of this project, But Aravena did it anyway, and he did what I would call a political answer, which means not really answering the question, but saying what you've planned to say anyway. And I don't say it's always bad to answer questions this way, mostly since Aravena's answer is related to the initial question, and what he says is actually pretty interesting to listen to. But the point here is to show you that you need to prepare your story like Aravena did, because he knows the importance of a good story. Facts aren't enough, logical arguments neither. There is something within humans that makes us respond to storytelling. We've been responding to them since our primitive ancestors drew on walls and tribes told stories around campfires. Good stories create a sense of connection. They build familiarities and trust, and it is why you should always tell stories when you can do so, because it is the best way for you to influence, teach, and inspire. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video interesting, and next time you watch a movie or read a book, try to think about the 3-act structure. You might see it everywhere after this video. And if you want to know more about storytelling, I made a video about a slightly other side of this topic, but it's very interesting, you should watch it. And if you want to see more of this type of content, please give me a like, subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss the next videos. See you!